Picture a dinner table, not just any dinner table, the kind you see in the illustrated papers. 40 feet of white linen so freshly laundered it almost hurts your eyes. Crystal that catches the gaslight and throws it back at you in pieces. Plates so thin you can see your own shadow through the porcelain if you hold them toward a candle. Now put food on that table. 14 courses, because 11 isn't enough, and 12 feels somehow unambitious. Turtle soup to start. Real turtle. A creature that crossed 2 oceans, specifically to end up in a silver tureen in Mayfair. Then fish. 2 kinds, then a remove, then the joints. Beef and mutton, and a saddle of lamb and a haunch of venison that a man in Scotland shot 3 days ago on a Tuesday morning before breakfast. Asparagus from a hothouse in Kent. Truffles carried overnight from France. Ices. Puddings. A dessert course so long that the candles burn down to their sockets before the port comes out. This is London. This is 1862. Now take away 90% of the city. Take away the white linen. Take away the crystal. Take away the turtle, the venison, the hothouse asparagus. Take away the meat entirely, what's left? A pot. Iron. Black. Crusted on the outside with the residue of 1,000 previous meals. Inside, water. And if this is a good day, if the workhouse master hasn't been skimming again, if the delivery came on time, if nobody above you in the chain got greedy, a thin grey slurry of oats that moves sluggishly when you stir it and clings to the ladle like it doesn't quite want to be served. That's gruel. And it kept half of Victorian London alive, or mostly alive, or alive enough to come back tomorrow and do it again, which is, depending on how you look at it, either a triumph of the human body or the most depressing sentence I've ever written. Tonight we're going back there, not to the dinner table with the crystal and the 14 courses. We're going to the kitchen, the other kitchen. The one that feeds the people nobody writes about in the illustrated papers except occasionally as a problem to be solved. I make these history stories, and at this point I genuinely don't know if anyone falls asleep to them, or if you're all just people who lie awake at night needing to know exactly what Victorian bone broth smelled like at 6 a.m. before you can feel right about the world. Maybe that's the same thing. Maybe knowing is how you rest. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness so complete it might as well be solid. Half a second of grace. Just half. The small gap between sleep and waking where you're nothing but a body in a bed. No name, no obligations, no particular facts about the world. Then the cold finds you. Not gradually, not the creeping cold that seeps in from the edges of a blanket. This cold is already everywhere, already inside your clothes, already deep in your hands and your chest and the back of your teeth. It's been in here all night, climbing through the crack in the attic window that nobody fixed in October and nobody will fix in January, and which has been democratically sharing the outside temperature with your room for the past 3 months. January 1862, Whitechapel, London. You're lying on a straw mattress in a garret room above a workhouse kitchen, and the straw is crackling quietly with the cold, and your name is Thomas Marsh, and you're 17 years old, and in approximately 2 hours you will feed 340 people their breakfast. Their breakfast will be gruel. The gruel will be thin. You know it will be thin because you made it yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, and in 8 months of making it, you've learned exactly how thin can get, before Mrs. Beale's particular silence becomes a specific kind of silence that means someone has miscalculated and that someone is you. You swing your legs out of bed. The floor, bare boards, no rug, is so cold it feels wet through your stockings. You've checked. It's not wet. It's just January, and wooden floors in garret rooms in Whitechapel in January are the kind of cold that transmits itself straight through wool and into the soles of your feet like a message. A daily message, clear in its meaning. Today will be hard. Most days are. You dress in the dark, which you've been able to do without thinking since about your third week. Rough linen shirt, the one with the frayed collar, waistcoat, jacket, and then the apron, always the apron, kept rolled on the floor beside the bed, so it's the first thing you reach for. Heavy canvas, stiff with dried starch and older things you've stopped examining, ties at the back with a cord you've replaced twice. You put it on. You're now, technically, a kitchen hand in Her Majesty's Whitechapel Union workhouse. Not a cook, not anywhere near a cook. You're the one who lifts and stirs and carries and scrubs, the one who loads coal and hauls sacks and spends extended periods with both hands in water cold enough to make your knuckles crack. The lowest grade of kitchen worker in an institution that is itself near the bottom of every social hierarchy Victorian England has arranged around itself. But you're employed. You have a roof. You have meals. More meals and more substantial meals than the people you feed. And in 1862 London, that puts you considerably ahead of a significant portion of the population. The irony of this is not lost on you. The people you feed are worse off than you are, but only just. The stairs from the garret are steep and unlit, and you take them one at a time, one hand on the wall, feet finding each step by feel. You've memorized the creaking ones, third from the bottom, seventh from the top, though at 4 a.m. there's nobody awake to disturb, or almost nobody. The smell intensifies as you descend. This is the thing about kitchen work. The smell lives in the building. It lives in the walls, in the wood of the tables and the stone of the floor, and probably in your hair, though you've stopped being able to tell because your nose stopped registering it as anything unusual about 3 weeks after you arrived. At 4 a.m, after 5 hours away from it, it finds you fresh. Grease. Old grease. Stratified over new grease. Stratified over the ghost of grease from last year and the year before that. The particular flat smell of cooked oats sitting in a pot since yesterday. That slightly sour, slightly starchy smell that's not quite sour milk, and not quite anything else. Something meaty and thin and not quite pleasant. The smell of bones that have been boiled for a very long time, past the point where they have anything interesting left to give, but still giving something. Still releasing, still insisting. And underneath everything else, the smell of large numbers of hungry people, of need, of bodies that haven't had enough, of something that isn't quite identifiable, except that once you've smelled it, you can't forget it, and you stop trying to name it and just acknowledge that it's there. Mrs. Beale is already in the kitchen. Of course she is. She's always already in the kitchen. Mrs. Beale is the head cook. That title carries, in a workhouse kitchen, considerably less dignity than it would in a private establishment. She's somewhere in her 50s, built solidly, with forearms that have spent decades in direct negotiation with heavy pots and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Her face suggests she has arrived at a personal arrangement with the universe. Not peace exactly, but a clear understanding of the terms. She's stirring one of the copper pots. She doesn't look up when you come in. Late, she says. You're not late. It's exactly 4 o'clock. She says this every morning. You've been here 8 months. She has said it every single morning. Yes, Mrs. Beale, you say. This is the correct response. You established this through trial and error. The error phase lasted about a week. She gestures toward the coal scuttle with her chin. The coal goes into the range. Your hands go from cold to filthy in approximately 30 seconds. The coal dust working into the cracks of your knuckles, into the calluses you've developed over 8 months of this particular morning ritual. You didn't have calluses when you came here from Lincolnshire. Your hands were farm soft, field soft, the softness of outdoor work rather than industrial work. They're not soft now. The fire catches. The range begins its morning breath, the deep, low exhalation of a machine coming back to life, the creak and ping of iron expanding as the heat reaches it, like a creature waking up and stretching. Warmth very slowly begins to fill the kitchen. You stand as close to the range as you can without entering Mrs. Beale's orbit, and let it work on your fingers, one by one, the sensation returning to them with that specific burning tingle that always makes you think for a second that something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. That's just what cold leaving your hands feels like. Oats, she says. The oats are in sacks in the storeroom. The storeroom is cold and dry and smells of grain and salt, and the preserved against hope's smell of things that are being made to last longer than things naturally last. Mrs. Beale keeps the key on a cord around her neck and logs every gram that comes out of that room in a ledger so meticulous it would embarrass a bank accountant. You know this storeroom completely. In the dark you could find anything in it. Oats, yellow cornmeal, dried peas, when there are dried peas, which is maybe 3 weeks in 4, salt, a great block of it, wrapped in cloth, chipped at daily, a jar of something that was once described as lard, but which has undergone some transformation during storage, dried thyme, mustard powder. Today is a gruel morning, which is every morning. You haul the oat sacks to the kitchen. Each one is heavy enough to require both arms and a specific way of carrying that you worked out around your second week. Leaning back slightly, the weight distributed across your lower back rather than your arms. Your back has developed its own ongoing conversation about this arrangement. A low, steady complaint that starts around 7 in the morning and doesn't stop until you fall asleep. You've started thinking of it as company. Mrs. Beale measures. She has a tin cup for this, specific and battered, the measurements worn off the sides. Unnecessary, because she measures by feel, by memory, by the weight of 8 years of making this exact thing. She measures by eye and by instinct and by something that goes deeper than either. The ratio, you've worked out from watching her, is roughly 1 part oats to 7 or 8 parts water. 1 part oats, 7 parts water. Think about that for a moment. If you made yourself oatmeal, proper oatmeal, the kind you eat for yourself on a Sunday morning when there's time, and then diluted it, not twice but 3 or 4 times beyond what the recipe suggests, stripped away not just the richness but the substance itself, until what you had was something that occupied the bowl without exactly filling it. That's what you're making. That's what 340 people are going to eat for breakfast in 2 hours. The oats go into the copper pots with cold water. The water comes from a tank in the yard that catches rainwater off the roof, not from the corner pump. Mrs. Beale is precise about this. The cholera epidemics of 1849 and 1854 killed people in this neighbourhood by the hundreds, and the women who survived them, and Mrs. Beale is one of them, though she has never said so directly. Learned, in the most immediate possible way, what dirty water means. The corner pump draws from the ground. The ground in Whitechapel is saturated with everything Whitechapel has put into it for 200 years. The tank water is safer. This is not scientific knowledge exactly. Nobody in this kitchen uses the word bacteria because nobody in London does yet. Not in 1862, not in this neighbourhood. But it's practical knowledge. The kind you earn by watching people die and working backward to the reason. The fire under the pots goes up. You stand by the first pot with the long wooden ladle and begin to stir. Stirring gruel is a skill. This sounds like something you should be able to dismiss, but you can't, because it turns out there are ways to do it badly and ways to do it right, and the difference matters. The pot is heavy. The ladle is heavy. The mixture, as it heats, thickens and wants to catch on the bottom, and if it catches and scorches, you have to tip the whole pot, scrub out the burned layer, start again. Mrs. Beale's silence when something has to be thrown out and started again is a specific atmospheric event. A weather system localized to the kitchen. You'd rather not cause it. So you stir, long strokes, all the way to the bottom, round and round, in a rhythm that your arm has memorized independently of your brain. Your shoulder begins complaining at about 4 minutes. By 8, it's a significant complaint. By 15 minutes, it's become its own sustained note, a vibration that runs from the shoulder blade down to the elbow. You stir anyway. The smell as the gruel heats is thin and warm. Not appetizing exactly, that's not the word, but something that communicates food without quite being food. The grain smell of oats, the slight dusty warmth, a promise made on behalf of better things. It smells like the idea of breakfast rather than breakfast itself. Mrs. Beale chips salt off the block with a small hammer. Chip, chip, chip. The pieces fall into the water. While the gruel cooks, the workhouse comes alive around you. You hear it through the walls, through the ceiling and the floor and the spaces between the stones. Coughing first, January coughing, the kind that starts in one corner of a dormitory and spreads like a flame through dry grass. One person setting off the next until the whole ward is a choir of lungs that haven't had quite enough warmth or food or clear air to stay entirely well. Then footsteps, the bell at 5:30, the shuffle of hundreds of people getting up. The workhouse is divided, men's wards, women's wards, children's wards, all separated by regulation. A husband and wife who enter together must eat apart, sleep apart, work apart, because the workhouse's theory of poverty involves the idea that comfort leads to dependency, and dependency is the enemy, and therefore comfort must be rationed like everything else. You've thought about this many times. You've never arrived at a satisfying answer. You've never seen the dormitories. You've heard about them. Long rooms with iron beds set close together, thin mattresses, thin blankets, no fires overnight, no privacy in any form. The smell, you've been told, is, well, not unlike the kitchen, but without the grease to soften it. 340 people getting up into January, getting up for a breakfast of what you're currently stirring. At 6 o'clock, Mrs. Beale says, "Ready. The gruel is done. 3 pots of it, steaming, grey-white, a colour that exists nowhere in the natural world and only in kitchens like this one. Ready." You take your position behind the serving counter. A long plank of wood, worn smooth, with a groove cut along the serving side where hundreds of thousands of bowls have slid across it over the years. The groove is polished as glass. Your hands know the weight of a full tin bowl and the resistance of the groove and the exact motion required to slide the bowl from the counter to the waiting hands without spilling. You've done this enough times that your body does it without asking your mind for permission. The bowls are stacked. Tin, mostly. Solid, functional, cold until the hot gruel hits them and then radiating warmth through the metal. A few wooden bowls for the longer-term inmates, the ones who've been here long enough to be trusted with something that can break. Trust in a workhouse is parcelled out in small denominations, Mrs. Beale ladles. You collect and distribute. The ladle she uses holds almost exactly one portion, 3/4 of a pint of gruel, the regulation amount as determined by the Poor Law Board in 1847, reviewed in 1852, not substantially changed since. 3/4 of a pint. The government has decided in its wisdom that this is breakfast. The inmates come in. They file through the door in order. Men first, by seniority. Then women. Children last. The children being last means that by the time their bowls are filled, the gruel has been sitting 20 minutes and has developed a skin, a thin, pale membrane that wrinkles when disturbed. You skim it off when you can, the edge of the ladle moving quickly across the surface. Mrs. Beale doesn't always notice. When she doesn't, you skim. When she does, she says nothing. She keeps ladling. The men first. They've been awake since 5, most of them. They're cold, and they've been working since the bell. Some of the men have morning duties, the ones that involve the building itself, the maintenance, the yard. And they're hungry in a way that lives differently in the body than simple not eating. 5 hours awake and moving on yesterday's nothing makes a particular kind of hunger. Not dramatic, not theatrical, deep and physical and patient and unavoidable, like debt. Most of them say nothing as they come through. They hold out their bowls, you fill them, they move on. This is the choreography. One man, gaunt, with a grey beard and eyes the colour of a window that hasn't been cleaned in years, holds his filled bowl in both hands for just a moment too long, not drinking it yet, not even raising it toward his mouth, just holding it, holding the warmth of the tin against his palms. His hands are shaking very slightly, not from the cold, or not entirely. He moves on. You don't watch him go. There are more bowls to fill. The women come after. The women's ward is further from the kitchen, so they walk further to get here and arrive slightly cooler, slightly more composed. The walk has been its own kind of preparation. They take their bowls with a range of expressions you've catalogued over 8 months. Resignation, which is the most common. A kind of furious efficiency, the expression of someone who has decided that the way to manage this is to be practical about it. Just practical. One meal at a time, one day at a time, no looking further. A small number of faces that hold something you can only describe as gratitude, which shouldn't be surprising given that they were hungry, and now they have something warm, but which always gives you a complicated feeling when you see it, because the thing they're grateful for is so small, and the need for it is so large. There's a woman called Martha, who comes through the line every single morning. 60, perhaps. It's genuinely hard to tell, because poverty ages people in ways that make the maths difficult. She might be 50, worn to 60. She takes her bowl and her 2 ounces of bread, and she sits at the table nearest the window. Every morning, the same table. She eats slowly, carefully, with the concentration of someone who has decided that eating slowly means the warmth lasts longer. Maybe she's right. Physiologically, you're not sure. Practically, it seems to help her. You watch her sometimes, in the gap between servings. The way she holds the bowl, the way her face does something complicated when the first spoonful reaches her. She's been here longer than you have. You don't know her story. You've never spoken to her. The kitchen staff don't talk to inmates except in the line, and in the line there's no time, but you've made her breakfast for 8 months. Then the children. Last. Always last, and in January this means the smallest and coldest and hungriest. 20 minutes after the first portions were served. 20 minutes in which the gruel has been losing temperature and developing the skin you've been skimming and thickening very slightly into something a fraction less thin. The children are a range of sizes that breaks down into roughly 3 groups. The ones old enough to have worked out the system, they walk through the line with a kind of matter-of-fact efficiency, hold out their bowls, take them back, head for the table with the calm of someone who's been doing this long enough that it's just Tuesday. The younger ones who don't have the system yet, who are uncertain or frightened or both, who hold their bowls at slightly the wrong angle and need reminding to take the bread from Doris before they move on. And the very small ones, the ones young enough that you're honestly not sure how they end up in a workhouse without an adult to look after them. But here they are. A girl, 5, maybe 6, comes through the line near the end. Brown hair cut very short, the workhouse cut that takes all the individuality away and leaves something functional. Eyes that are too large for her face in the way of children who haven't eaten quite enough for quite a while. A cold sore at the corner of her mouth, cracked and healing. The kind you get when your immune system is managing on not quite enough. She holds out her bowl, you fill it. She takes it in both hands, carefully, concentrating with her whole face on the task of not tilting it, not spilling it. She moves away from the counter with the small deliberate steps of someone carrying something very important. It's 3/4 of a pint of watered oats. In the economy of her world right now, it is everything. You watch her find a place at the table. You watch her eat. Not fast, carefully, methodically, the way Martha eats, the way people eat here when they've learned that there's nothing after the bowl is empty until noon, and noon is 6 hours away. 6 hours. Stone breaking or laundry or lessons. 6 hours on 3/4 of a pint and 2 ounces of bread. You ate this morning from Mrs. Beale's separate pot. More than this. A larger portion, better seasoned, occasionally with a fragment of bacon fat floating in it that provides something resembling protein. Not plenty, not close to luxury, but more. Standing behind the counter filling bowls, you feel the weight of the difference. You don't say anything about it. You keep filling bowls. After the breakfast service you clean the pots, the ladles, the serving counter with its worn groove, the floor which catches everything, spilled broth and dropped bread, and the tracked-in mud of January, a specific mud, Whitechapel mud, that has a quality distinct from mud elsewhere in London. Cleaning a copper pot that held 100 portions of gruel is not a quick process. The oats that caught on the bottom have welded themselves to the metal with the enthusiasm of things that intend to stay. You scrape with a wooden paddle, then scrub with sand, then water, then your hands going in with a rag, your knuckles finding the rough patches, the cleaning water cold because there isn't enough hot water for both cooking and cleaning, and cooking comes first. Your hands are in cold water for most of the next hour. The cracks in your knuckles open a little. The salt of the cleaning water finds them. You keep going, because the pots need to be clean before 11, when the bone broth goes in. At 9 o'clock a cart arrives in the workhouse yard. You hear it before you see it. The iron wheels on the cobblestones, the specific clatter and clank of bones shifting against each other in the wooden bin. a sound you'd never heard before you came here, a sound you can now identify from 2 streets away. It means mid-morning. It means the next meal is beginning. You go out to meet it. The yard is a square of grey stone, open to the sky. The cold here is different from kitchen cold. It's not heavy with steam and grease. It's dry and sharp, the kind that goes straight for your ears and the bridge of your nose and takes up residence. In the centre of the yard, a boy named Jimmy is at the water pump. 13 years old, arms like bent wire, a cap he's never been seen without. He was born here. The workhouse is his entire world. He pumps water and he doesn't ask questions about anything. He nods at you. You nod back. The cart driver is a man named Silas. You don't know his last name, have never asked. He's been doing this route long enough that his coat has absorbed the smell of his cargo permanently. The specific aroma of bones and old grease and something underneath both that is animal in origin and defies further description. You smell him before the cart rounds the corner. He doesn't say anything when he sees you. Neither do you. This is the inspection, not a negotiation. The price is set, but the examination. You look at what he's brought. He watches you look. You lean over the bin at the back of the cart. Not beautiful, these bones. Never beautiful. A mixture. Leg bones, rib bones, knuckle bones, fragments that resist confident identification. All of them grey-white, scoured, bearing the marks of previous boilings. Some still have bits of cartilage attached, going translucent at the edges. Some have been cracked along their length, the hollow centre visible, the marrow cavity scraped clean. You pick one up, lighter than it should be. The density gone, not the living density of a bone with marrow in it, but something closer to chalk, the same shape, less substance. You hold it for a moment longer than necessary. Somewhere across London, in houses you'll never enter, people this morning are eating breakfast from the same hotels and chop houses whose bones you're holding. Devilled kidneys, bacon and eggs in silver dishes, toast in silver racks. The bones from their table went to the kitchen. The kitchen made stock. When the stock was done, the bones went to the bone collector. The collector sold them, maybe once more to a cheaper kitchen, maybe straight to you. They've been boiled before, once, twice, perhaps 3 times. The marrow is gone, the collagen is mostly gone, the fat is gone. What remains is calcium and connective tissue and the memory of what they were. But they still smell faintly of meat. And in a workhouse kitchen in January, that smell means something. You put the bone back. Same as usual, Silas says. Same as usual. He unloads. You carry the bones inside. The broth begins at 10. Water first. Tank water, the safe water, measured into the pot. Then the bones, all of them tumbled in, filling the pot to roughly the halfway mark. Then the fire goes up. Real heat now, the range working hard, because you need this to boil, not simmer, not hover, hopefully, boil. The smell changes as the temperature rises. At first, cold water and cold. Bone, a mineral smell like the inside of a stone well. Then, as the heat builds, something else begins to emerge, a meatiness. Thin, distant, the way a piece of music sounds when you're 2 streets away from where it's being played. The idea of meatiness rather than the thing itself. The smell of animals that were once alive, that walked around and ate grass and grew and breathed, reduced now to this, their calcium architecture, giving up the last of whatever they have to give. It's not an appetizing smell. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be sustaining. There's a significant difference, a philosophically significant difference that people in 1862 don't quite have the words for but understand practically, which is that you don't need food to be good, you need it to be enough. Mrs. Beale adds the vegetables, and here is where the economics of Victorian poverty gets specific and strange and quietly horrifying. The vegetables are scraps, not metaphorically, literally. The outer leaves of cabbages, the tough, yellowing exterior that a middle-class cook would compost without a second thought, the tops of turnips, the peels of carrots, the kind of material that gets thrown away before the actual vegetable gets used. These come from Paddy Walsh, a costermonger from Petticoat Lane, who brings his unsellable remnants here 3 mornings a week for a price that is, as best you can calculate, somewhere between almost nothing and nothing. The cabbage outer leaves go in. They're going yellow at the edges, but they have flavour. They have something. They have, though nobody here uses this word, vitamins, things the body needs, things the gruel doesn't have. The turnip tops go in, the carrot peels, onion skins, the dry papery layers, saved somewhere in the chain and sold on, adding colour and the ghost of taste. A handful of dried thyme, so old you have to smell it before adding it just to confirm it still smells like something. Salt, always salt. And then, time. Stirring the broth in 20-minute intervals gives you time to think. This is not necessarily a gift. You think about Lincolnshire, the farm, the particular quality of light there in summer, which is nothing like London light. London light arrives pre-filtered through coal smoke and crowded buildings and the exhalations of 1 million people, so that even on clear days it has a quality of usedness to it, of second hand. The Lincolnshire light comes straight off the North Sea and arrives flat and clean and slightly cold, even in July. You haven't been back. You couldn't afford to go back. Your wages, 4 shillings a week, which is not nothing, which is in fact more than some people earn, go largely toward the debt you arrived with, the money borrowed for the coach fare, and the week you spent looking for work before you found this position, and toward the small savings you're building towards something you haven't quite defined yet. Something after this. Something. You stir the broth. The smell in the kitchen is changing now, warming, the thin meatiness thickening slightly as whatever collagen remains in the bones melts into the water, and the cabbage and the turnip tops add their green note to the animal one. A smell that communicates, if not comfort, then function. The body receiving the information. Something is being done. Something is being prepared. The Victorian understanding of nutrition was primitive in ways that would seem almost charming if the consequences weren't what they were. They knew roughly about calories. They understood that bodies needed fuel to work. They knew that meat was superior to vegetables for strength. They knew abstractly that children needed more food than they were getting. But they didn't know about vitamins. They didn't know that the reason so many poor children had bowing legs was rickets, vitamin D deficiency. They didn't know that the fatigue and bleeding gums of certain workhouse inmates was scurvy, vitamin C deficiency. They saw people wasting and called it poverty, which was true but incomplete. What they knew, broth is better than no broth. So, broth. Mrs. Beale tastes it at about 11. She does this with a wooden spoon, the same spoon every time, blowing on it first, then a small considered sip. Her face during the tasting is unreadable. You've tried to read it for 8 months. Approval, you think sometimes. Mild disappointment sometimes. Sometimes the absolute blankness of someone whose inner life is not available for inspection. More salt, she says. Salt goes in, She tastes again. "Ready," she says. "Ready." The noon service is different from the morning. Morning hunger is quiet. People emerge from sleep still dull and cold, the hunger present but not yet at full pitch. They take their bowls without much expression, eat without much urgency. By noon, they've been awake 7 hours and working for most of them. The stone-breaking yard, men breaking stone into gravel for road making. Manual labour performed for no other purpose than to be labour, the task chosen specifically for its pointlessness, so it can't compete with private enterprise, has been running since 6. The oakum-picking room, where inmates sit for hours unravelling old rope into its component fibres, the laundry, the cleaning, the children's lessons. 7 hours of this on 3/4 of a pint and 2 ounces of bread. The noon line forms fast. Too fast. A compression of bodies near the door, not quite a fight. You can see people working hard not to make it a fight, but an urgency that lives in the way everyone moves, the way they lean slightly forward, the way nobody is quite willing to be behind anyone else. The workhouse master is at the door today. His name is Fletcher. He's a man who has arrived at every position of authority he's ever held, with the certainty of someone who was born to administrate and has never questioned the arrangement. He's 50, well fed in the specific way of men who make decisions about other people's food, with a kind of face that understands budgets better than people. He's here because there's a visitor, a poor law inspector, a Mr. Howard, the name on the card that arrived yesterday, which you saw because Mrs. Beale left it on the table, and you read it before realising you probably weren't supposed to. Inspectors come occasionally, men from the board, from the government, from the theoretically existing oversight structure that is meant to prevent workhouses from actively killing people with bad food. They come with notebooks. They look at things. They write things down. And then, largely, nothing changes. But the possibility that something might change means that when an inspector is coming, certain people become very interested in doing things correctly, or in appearing to. Fletcher, you notice, is talking to the inspector near the door, with the specific body language of a man who is completely relaxed and not worried about anything at all. You notice this because you've seen every variation of Fletcher at normal temperature, and this is not that. The serving goes smoothly. The broth today is not rich, that's far too strong a word, but more substantial than the spent bone version, because last week you bought marrow bones from Kathy, more on Kathy shortly, and those bones added something real to the pot. A ghost of fat on the surface, a slightly deeper colour, a taste that is actually something approaching taste. Mrs. Beale is serving with the ladle a fraction deeper than usual. You've noticed this. The ladle goes in, comes out full, not just regular full, but to the brim. The bowls go out heavier than Monday, heavier than last week. 60 portions in, 70, you do the calculation. She's giving maybe an extra ½ ounce per bowl. 340 times an extra ½ ounce. That's roughly 10 extra pounds of broth, from a pot that was measured exactly, meaning the bowls at the end of the line will be thinner. The people at the end of the line, as established, are the ones who couldn't push. The old, the weak, the children. You file this, as you file many things here, in a place where you can see it without being required to act on it. The inspector, Mr. Howard, enters the kitchen at approximately 12:30. He's accompanied by Fletcher, who performs the role of man with nothing to hide with moderate success. Mr. Howard looks around the kitchen with the interested, noting expression of a man who is going to write a report later, and wants to have something to say. He goes to the nearest pot. He bends over it. He makes a note. He asks Mrs. Beale something. You don't hear what, but you see her answer. Brief, direct, without performance. She's Mrs. Beale. She doesn't change her register for inspectors any more than she changes it for Tuesday. He picks up a ladle, examines it, sets it down. Then, this part you do hear, because he raises his voice, slightly in the unconscious habit of a man used to speaking to rooms. What is the ratio of oats to water in the morning porridge? Fletcher starts to answer. Mrs. Beale says, without looking up from the pot, 1 to 7. A pause. The regulation says 1 to 6. Everyone in the kitchen becomes very interested in what they're doing. Fletcher says smoothly, the cook misspoke. 1 to 6 as per board regulations, of course. Mrs. Beale keeps working. She doesn't correct this. She doesn't agree with it either. She simply keeps working, and the silence she keeps is a specific, considered silence. The silence of someone who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. Mr. Howard makes a note. You keep scraping. 1 to 7. That's what it's been since you arrived, and probably before that. The delivery shortfall comes roughly once a month, and the adjustment comes from the dilution because it has to come from somewhere. Because the numbers in Fletcher's ledger have to add up, because 340 people need to eat, and the budget for feeding them was set by people who eat from an entirely different set of pots. 1 to 7. A week later you see Fletcher's copy of the inspector's report lying on the kitchen table. He's left it there by accident, or perhaps not accident. Perhaps he doesn't think kitchen hands read, which most of them don't, but you do, which you've never disclosed. Generally satisfactory, provisions adequate, staff professional and responsive, satisfactory, adequate. You fold the paper exactly back to where it was and go back to work. At 3 o'clock there's a knock at the back gate. Not every day, but often enough to be part of the kitchen's rhythm. 3 fast, 2 slow. Whether meaningful or not, you've never been able to determine, but you've learned to respond to it. Mrs. Beale nods at you without looking up. You go to the gate. The woman outside is about 40, in a coat that was good 10 years ago, and has been being something else ever since. She has a basket. In the basket, bones, but different bones from Silas's bones. These are fresh, or nearly fresh, bought from butchers this morning, the day's offcuts and trimmings, the parts that won't go to the respectable trade. Leg bones with marrow still in them, dark red and glistening in the hollow centre. A knuckle joint, swollen, bluish white. Vertebrae from something you can't immediately identify. Her name is Cathy. She moves between butchers and kitchens, buying what the butchers can't sell and selling it to kitchens that will take it. The lungs, the lights, the trotters, the bones with actual substance left in them, the bones that haven't been rendered useless yet. She sells to anyone who'll buy, and the workhouse will buy what other kitchens won't, which puts you on her regular route. You look at the basket. Good bones. Genuinely good. The marrow in the leg bone is still intact. You can tell from the colour, from the slight glistening. Real marrow fat, enough to make a real difference to broth that usually has none. How much, you ask. She names a price. You know the kitchen budget. You've absorbed it through 8 months of overhearing. You know what there is this week and what there isn't. Half that, you say. Cathy laughs, not unkindly, the laugh of someone who expected this. 2/3, she says. You look at the bones again. £12 roughly. At 2/3 of her asking price, the marrow alone justifies it. Friday's broth. 340 bowls of something that will actually taste like something. Done, you say. And you feel, for a moment, something that might be described as competence. The small, specific satisfaction of a transaction completed at the right price. It lasts approximately 10 seconds before you're back to carrying the basket inside. The bones go into the cold room. Friday will be better. An hour after Kathy leaves, there's another knock. Not 3 fast, 2 slow. Just 3 knocks, hesitant. The knock of someone who isn't sure they have the right to knock at all. You go to the gate. The girl outside is 15 or 16. She's dressed in clothes that were respectable recently. A dress that's clean but wrong somehow. Borrowed looking. A previous generation of someone else's respectability. No coat. January. No coat whatsoever. She has a tin cup. She holds it up. You know what this is. There are people who wait near workhouse kitchens not to apply for admission. Admission is a whole process, a formal surrender, papers and forms and the loss of essentially everything. But to see if anything comes out the back. Scraps, leftover broth from the pot, bread that wasn't served, anything that might otherwise go back to the store. The regulations are clear. Nothing leaves through the back gate. Fletcher would make this very specific. Fletcher would say you'd lose your position. Fletcher would be right. The girl is wearing no coat in January. Her lips are the specific pale colour that happens when someone has been cold for a sustained period without being able to get warm. Her hands are cracked in a way that's different from how your hands are cracked. Yours are cracked from work, from cold water and coal and constant use. Hers are cracked from neglect, from cold and insufficient fat and nothing to put on them. You look at her for a moment. You look at the tin cup. You go back inside. You find the pot with about an inch of this morning's better broth still in it, from the marrow bones, the real broth, not the spent bone liquid. You look at it. You look at the door to the kitchen where Mrs. Beale is working. You fill a bowl, a full portion, a tin bowl, workhouse standard, full. You carry it to the gate, you hand it through. The girl takes it. For a moment she just looks at you, and the look has in it surprise and hunger and something that gratitude can't quite cover. Something that lives underneath gratitude, in the place where gratitude comes from, which is the awareness of need. She drinks it standing there at the gate in the cold, not sipping but drinking steadily, the way someone drinks when they've been waiting for this exact thing for most of the day. She hands you back the empty bowl. She doesn't say anything. She turns and walks away. You bring the bowl back inside. Mrs. Beale is at the range, back to you. She hasn't turned around. Lock the gate, she says. You lock the gate. Neither of you mentions it again. But you've been here 8 months, and in 8 months you've never seen Mrs. Beale turn her back on the gate when someone was at it. 5 o'clock. Supper. Bread. Brown. Dense. Made 2 days ago in the bakehouse and stored, firm in that particular way of workhouse bread that was never quite fresh enough to be called fresh. And tonight a scraping of fat. The kitchen fat collected from the pots, grey-white, slightly gritty, tasting of almost nothing except the ghost of the broth it came from. That supper. You hand it out at the counter again, the same groove in the wood, the same worn rhythm of hand and bowl and ladle. Doris beside you with the bread, her movements so practised she could do this asleep. The rations smaller than morning, 2 ounces, the regulation amount, and tonight some of the bread loaves are smaller than they should be, which you notice because you've learned to notice, because 8 months in this kitchen has made you precise about sizes and weights in ways you were never precise before. The grey-eyed man comes through again. He looks different at 5 than at 6 in the morning, more solid. The work has warmed him, steadied the shaking hands. Stone-breaking does this. Exhausts, but also grounds. The physical labour settling the body into itself in a way that nothing else quite manages. He takes his bread without looking at you. Martha's at her window table. The window is dark now, January 5 o'clock, full dark outside, but she sits there anyway. Habit. The table nearest the window, whether or not there's anything to see through it. Looking at her reflection in the black glass, or perhaps looking past it at nothing, which is different. She eats slowly. The girl with the cold sore is at the children's table. She's been in this building all day, in lessons probably, or in whatever supervised activity fills the hours for the youngest inmates. She eats her bread in measured bites, not quite mechanical, more like careful, like someone who has learned to be careful with things. She's 5 or 6 years old, and she's already learned to be careful with things. You watch her for a moment. Then you watch the man with the grey eyes, not looking at anyone, eating bread. Then Martha, eating slowly at her window, and you think about the different kinds of hunger you've seen today. The physical hunger of the men who've been working, an honest bodily hunger that work creates and work also manages. Martha's quieter hunger, which isn't only for food. The child's measured hunger already disciplined. The girl at the gate's hunger that had passed beyond the point of looking like hunger and was starting to look like a longer story. And your own hunger, different from all of them. Not desperate, not shaking, not the hunger that forces decisions, but there, always there. A constant low note underneath everything else, the baseline of not quite enough that you've stopped noticing consciously and started carrying the way you carry the ache in your shoulder. Just a feature of the day, just how this is. You're not hungry like they are. You're not full. Nobody in this building is full. There are places in this city where the business of food for the poor happens at industrial scale, and on your one free afternoon of the week you go to find one. Mrs. Beale gives you Thursday afternoons technically, 3 hours from the end of the dinner cleaning to the start of supper preparation. It's not a lot, it's something. Most Thursday afternoons you go to the market in Petticoat Lane, not to buy, you can't afford much, but to look, to stand in the noise and the smell of a working market, the costermongers calling their wares over each other, the fish smell and the cabbage smell and the overripe fruit smell, all mixing into something that is, despite everything, full of life in a way the workhouse kitchen never quite is. This Thursday you go somewhere else. You follow a smell. You've been tracking it for weeks, noticing which direction the wind brings a specific heavy, organic, undeniable smell. Not pleasant, the opposite, in fact, but interesting. The kind of smell that has information in it, if you're willing to go toward it rather than away. 3 streets from the workhouse, tucked into a converted stable yard behind a tallow chandler's, is a bone-boiling establishment. This is where your bones come from before Silas brings them to you. Not the fresh ones Kathy supplies. Those come from butchers directly. But Silas's spent bones, the ones that have been used once already by hotel kitchens and private houses, they come here first. The man who runs it is named Culper. He's 60, perhaps. wiry and tough in the way of men who've spent their lives doing heavy manual work in an unpleasant environment and made their peace with it so thoroughly that they've started to seem part of the environment. He has the hands of someone who works in very hot water all day. He doesn't stop working when you arrive. He looks at you, assesses you, decides you're harmless, and keeps working. The operation is simple in theory. Bones come in from collection routes all over the city. Culper's boys, 4 of them, ranging from 12 to 16, run the routes, going to the back doors of hotels and chop houses and private houses, and collecting the bones from the previous day's cooking. They bring them back here in a cart. Culper sorts them. First quality bones, fresh, with marrow, with collagen, with actual substance, go to buyers who will pay more. These might go to soup kitchens that serve a slightly better class of poor. They might go to certain restaurants that make their own stock. They might go to private houses that want the marrow specifically. Second quality bones, used once, the marrow gone or nearly gone, the collagen diminished, go to places like your workhouse kitchen at a lower price. These are Silas's bones. Third quality, the bones that have been boiled twice already, or that never had much to begin with, or that are fragmentary, broken down. These get ground, bone meal, garden soil, or in some establishments. And this is the part of the Victorian bone economy that becomes genuinely difficult to think about if you follow the logic too far. They get ground and added to flour, because ground bone resembles flour in texture. Because there are bread makers and food processors in London in 1862 who will add things to their product that stretch the quantity without the customer knowing. This is not legal, or rather, there are laws against it that are not well enforced. Adulteration is the word for it. Victorian food adulteration is a subject so extensive and so alarming that it has its own government inquiry in 1863, a parliamentary committee that will discover that virtually every processed food sold to the poor of London contains things that are not the food they're supposed to be. Bread contains chalk, sometimes alum, occasionally bone meal. Milk contains water, sometimes chalk, sometimes the specific kind of opacity that comes from animal brains, added to thin the mixture without making it look thin. Beer contains everything. The list of what gets put in beer to extend it or strengthen it or make it cheaper to produce is long, and on reflection surreal. Salt, sulfuric acid, various unspecified botanicals. Tea, the 4th infusion tea that your workhouse serves as supper drink, is not the worst offender. But tea has its own economy of adulteration. Used leaves, dried and re-dyed and resold. Sweepings from warehouse floors. Various plants that are brown and not tea. The food the poor eat in 1862 is not what it says it is. It is often less than it appears to be. It is also often the only thing available. Culper's yard smells the way it smells. The deep, penetrating, organic smell of bones in hot water, of collagen releasing, of animal matter being systematically reduced. And after about 5 minutes you stop noticing it, which tells you something about how thoroughly you've been marinated in kitchen smells over the past 8 months. "What do you want?" Culper says. He's at a large pot over a fire in the yard. He does his boiling outside, which is a choice that makes obvious sense, and which you wish your kitchen made more often. "I work at the Whitechapel Union," you say. "We buy from Silas." "I know you do. I wanted to see where the bones come from." He looks at you for a moment, the look of a man assessing whether this is a problem. "And?" "No and, just wanted to understand it." He grunts, stirs the pot. The pot is full of bones. Second quality, you can tell from the look of them. Grey-white, used, the marrow gone, going into the boil for what might be their second or third time, coming out eventually as the liquid that Silas will deliver tomorrow, that you'll pour into the workhouse pot, that will become noon broth for 340 people. You understand it now, Culper says. You look at the pot. You think about the chain, from the joint of beef on the hotel table, through the kitchen, through this yard, through your workhouse pot, into the bowls at noon. I think so, you say. Good. Then go. I've got work. There's a place you found. 3 buildings down from the workhouse, there's an old counting house, disused now, the business that occupied it gone somewhere else or simply gone, with a fire escape ladder bolted to the back wall. You discovered this about 2 months ago, on a Thursday afternoon with a bit more time than usual, walking further than you normally do. The ladder goes to the roof. The roof of the counting house is flat, edged with a low parapet, and from it, from this one specific spot in Whitechapel on this roof, you can see an extraordinary amount of London. You go there now, on this January Thursday, your breath-making clouds. The city spreads below you. It doesn't look like the city from down there. From down there, it's just the immediate 10 feet in front of you. The street, the next building, the noise and the smell and the specific demands of whatever is right in front of your face. From up here, it's different. To the west, distantly, smoke and towers and the thick grey-brown air that hangs over the centre of London like weather. You can see the shapes of church steeples through the haze. There are hundreds of churches in London, and their spires mark the skyline at irregular intervals, the way masts mark a harbour. The Thames you can't quite see from here, but you can see where it is by the particular concentration of smoke, the density of industry and movement that clusters along the riverbank, the wharves, the warehouses, the ships arriving from everywhere in the world, carrying everything the world produces. Below you, Whitechapel, the streets you know, the buildings you walk past every morning, so familiar they've stopped being things you actually see and started being just the route. From up here, they're buildings again. Real buildings with height and shadow, and the particular way the winter light hits them, making the grime on their faces almost beautiful. The workhouse is visible from here. A large brick block, not distinctive, not trying to be anything other than functional. Somewhere inside it, right now, Doris is slicing bread for supper, and Mrs. Beale is checking the afternoon inventory, and 340 people are doing what they do in the gap between noon and 5. A city of 2.5 million people. It's the largest city in the world in 1862. London is, not unambiguously, but by most measures, the centre of the world economy. The ships in the Thames carry silk from China and cotton from America and spices from India and everything from everywhere, and it all passes through here, through these docks and warehouses and counting houses. And 3 streets from the counting house whose roof you're standing on, a 6-year-old girl is eating 2 ounces of bread for supper. You're aware that you can hold both of these things in your head at the same time. The greatest city in the world, a 6-year-old eating 2 ounces of bread. You're not sure if that awareness is progress or just pain. The cold on the roof is significant. The wind, at this height, finds every gap in your jacket and exploits it. But you stay for a while. You look at the city. You try to understand it in a way that's bigger than the kitchen, bigger than the morning gruel and the afternoon broth and the evening bread. The whole machine of it, the whole vast complex organism of 2.5 million people eating and working and sleeping and being hungry and being fed and being something in between. You are a small part of this, a very small part, the kitchen hand in the workhouse kitchen, the one who stirs and carries and cleans and sometimes on Thursday afternoons climbs to the roof of an empty building to look at the city he can't afford to fully participate in. But you feed 340 people twice a day. That's something. You're not sure what exactly, but it's something. The winter has its specific curriculum this winter of 1862. January teaches cold is not one thing. There's the cold of the dormitory before the bell, which is the cold of stillness. The cold of the yard at 9 in the morning, which is the cold of movement, the wind adding itself to the base temperature. The cold of the kitchen in the first hour before the range heats up, which is the worst, a wet cold, the cold of stone and metal and ceramic that absorbs cold and holds it and releases it slowly through the morning. And then there's the cold that isn't temperature, the cold of a bowl of gruel that's been waiting in a stack for 20 minutes before it's filled, the cold that comes into the dining hall on the backs of 300 people who've been working outside, the cold of the January light through the high windows, which is the colour of something that gave up. You learn to be warm from the inside out, to eat your kitchen staff breakfast standing as close to the range as possible, to keep moving, to never quite stop. February teaches. The gruel is not the only thin thing. The delivery shortfalls that come once a month have been coming twice a month in February. The oat supply is disrupted. You hear this in fragments from Mrs. Beale's conversations with the delivery men, from Fletcher's conversations with the ledger that he thinks nobody else is reading. A supply problem somewhere up the chain, higher prices, a decision made by someone who lives very far from the consequences that the ratio can be adjusted slightly. 1 to 7 becomes, in 3 weeks of February, 1 to 8. The bowls become thinner. The people eating them become, not noticeably more hollow, not immediately, but if you watch carefully, you can see the grey-eyed man's hands begin to shake again by the end of the second week. You can see Martha eat more slowly, stretching the meal further, knowing or sensing that this is less than last month. You can see the children eat faster, not slower, which is the opposite of what they do when there's enough. When there's enough, they take their time. When there isn't enough, they eat fast, the instinct to get it in before it's gone overriding the discipline to make it last. Children know. They don't know they know, but their bodies know. February also brings Dr. Carmichael. He's the workhouse medical officer, visiting twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You see him only occasionally, passing through the kitchen on his way to or from the infirmary ward. He's 40-something, with the specific tired alertness of a doctor who sees too much and can do too little, who has made his peace with the ratio between what he can help and what is simply the condition of things. He stops in the kitchen one Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of February. You're scrubbing the pots. He looks at the pots. He looks at you. The broth, he says, is it as thin as it tastes? You don't answer immediately. The correct answer, the safe answer, is that the broth is prepared according to Mrs. Beale's standard procedures and you're just the kitchen hand. You stir and carry and clean. The recipe is not your business. But Dr. Carmichael is looking at you like he actually wants to know. It's thinner than it was in December, you say. He makes a small sound, not quite a sigh. something adjacent to it. 2 of the children in the infirmary, he says, as if continuing a thought he was already having before he walked in. Bronchitis, officially, which is true, but what makes bronchitis take hold in a child who came in reasonably well fed in November and has been declining since? What is the mechanism of that? You don't know what he wants you to say. The cold, you say. The diet. The diet, he confirms. Specifically, not enough fat, not enough protein, not enough of several things that would help a child's immune system resist a chest infection in February. The same things that would help them resist it are the things we don't have, or don't have enough of, or have, and give them too thin a version of. He stops. Seems to remember he's talking to the kitchen hand. Sorry, he says. I think out loud when there's nobody more appropriate around. You look at the pot you've been scrubbing. Is there something we could add, you say? To the broth. Something cheaper that has more... You don't have the word protein available to you, but you try to gesture toward the idea. More substance? He thinks about it. Dried peas, he says. Lentils, if you can get them. They're cheap. They have more nutritional value than the bones by this point in the boiling cycle. Liver, if it can be sourced cheaply. The butchers sometimes practically give it away. It's not popular. He pauses. Whether the budget? I can try, you say. He looks at you for a moment. The look of someone reassessing someone else. Do that, he says, and then he leaves. You talk to Mrs. Beale. This is not something you do lightly. Mrs. Beale is not inaccessible exactly, but she has specific temperatures for specific types of conversation, and the temperature for kitchen hand suggests change is, as far as you've been able to establish, somewhere just above cold. You tell her about Dr. Carmichael. Not the whole conversation. You summarize. Children in the infirmary, February shortfalls, the idea that dried peas might help. Mrs. Beale listens. She doesn't look at you while she listens. She's sorting bones, feeling each one with her fingers the way she does, making rapid decisions. She's quiet for a long time after you finish. I know, she says finally. Not. I didn't know that. Not. Good point. I know. She knows. She has always known. She's been running this kitchen, feeding these people, watching the cycle of shortfalls and adjustments, and the small accumulating effects of not quite enough for 8 years. The peas are in the budget, she says. On paper, they come on alternate weeks. Fletcher moves the money when there's a shortfall in the coal account, which means peas get traded for coal because in January coal is the more immediately visible problem. Can we? You start. No, she says, not without Fletcher approving a budget change. And if we asked him, then Fletcher would ask where the request came from. And if the request came from the kitchen, he'd want to know why the kitchen thinks it has opinions about the budget. And then someone in this kitchen would be having a different kind of conversation with Fletcher. She picks up a bone, sets it down. In March, she says, the coal budget normalizes. The peas come back. March, 6 weeks away. 2 children in the infirmary now. All right, you say, you go back to work. But the next week on your own time, you go to Paddy Walsh at the market. Paddy Walsh who brings the cabbage leaves and turnip tops. And you have a conversation with him about dried lentils, which he sometimes gets in bulk from a warehouse supplier, at a price that is, if you're creative about where it comes from, manageable within the kitchen's informal emergency fund. The tin on the top shelf, the one labelled Emergency Provisions. You use it. Mrs. Beale sees the lentils go into the pot the following Tuesday. She doesn't ask where they came from. She tastes the broth at 11. Ready, she says. Not differently, just ready. But it is different. You can taste it yourself when you have the kitchen staff portion at noon. A thickness, a substance, a slight earthiness from the lentils that gives the broth something the bones alone haven't been providing for months. On Thursday, Dr. Carmichael passes through the kitchen again. He doesn't stop, but he slows for a moment when he passes the broth pot, and he inhales just slightly, and he glances at you. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. In the first week of March, Martha doesn't come to breakfast. You notice it because you've been watching for her every morning for 8 months, the way you watch for landmarks, not consciously but automatically so that their absence registers before you've worked out what's missing. She's not at the window table. You think, sleeping in, unwell, moved to a different ward, 100 possibilities. The second morning, also not there. On the third day, you ask Doris. Doris has been in this kitchen longer than anyone and knows things about the inmates the way the building itself knows things. Doris is quiet for a moment. The infirmary, she says, and then, she's very old, Tom. She's not calling you Tom as a nickname. She's calling you Tom because that's your name, and she's using it in the way people use names when what they're saying is important and they want you to hear it properly. Martha is very old. The infirmary is across the yard in a separate building, and you don't have access to it and wouldn't know what to do if you did. It's Dr. Carmichael's territory. You go back to the morning gruel service. The window table stays empty for a week. On the 8th morning, a different woman sits there, young, recently arrived, looking at the window with the specific blankness of someone who hasn't worked out what she's looking at yet. You serve her. You fill her bowl. You don't tell her it was someone else's table. She'll find her own table eventually. That's how it works. You find your place, and you sit in it. And then at some point you don't, and someone else sits there. It happens on a Friday. The delivery doesn't come. Not Silas. Silas is reliable, has never not come. The oat delivery. The weekly oat delivery from the supplier, which arrives on Friday mornings in time for Saturday's morning gruel, and which has been arriving on Friday mornings without interruption for as long as anyone in the kitchen can remember. Doesn't come. Mrs. Beale, at 8 in the morning, is standing at the storeroom door with the look of someone performing a mathematical calculation that keeps coming up with an answer she doesn't want. You stand behind her. The sacks in the storeroom, 4 of them. Full sacks hold 100 portions each at the usual ratio. 4 sacks, 1 to 7, is 400 portions. They need to serve 340 portions this morning, 340 at noon, 340 this evening. You do the maths. 400 portions total in stock. 3 separate meals needed for 340 people. The sums don't work. When does the delivery come, you ask? Monday, Mrs. Beale says. Monday. 3 days of meals with 400 portions worth of provisions. You look at the sacks, you look at the pots, you think about the ratio. 1 to 7 becomes 1 to 8 becomes 1 to 9, and eventually you're serving hot water with a memory of oats. Fletcher, you say, in meeting stay, back this evening. Which means by the time Fletcher is available to authorise an emergency purchase, if he would, today's meals have already been served. Mrs. Beale closes the storeroom door. She stands there for a moment, absolutely still, and in her stillness you can see the exact shape of the problem. She's been here 8 years. She's done this calculation before. She knows what happens when the food doesn't stretch, and she knows what happens when the food runs out, and she knows which of those is worse. Start with the morning as usual, she says. 1 to 7. We need to protect the morning meal. And noon? 1 to 9. You look at her. 1 to 9, she says again. Not less than that. 1 to 9 is still food. It is. Technically. Marginally. And bread. Doris cuts it thinner tonight. Not half, but thinner. A quarter less. You carry the oats. You make the gruel at 1 to 7, the usual ratio, because the morning meal is the one that has to be protected, the one that has to hold people through the morning's work, and you serve it and people eat it and nobody knows that the sacks in the storeroom are already being carefully rationed. At noon you make the broth. The bones from Kathy, the good bones still in the cold room from Tuesday, go into the pot. Everything. All of them. The broth at noon needs to be as good as it can be because the gruel at noon, you've already decided this, and Mrs. Beale hasn't said no, will be 1 to 9. The broth is the best you've made, proper marrow in the pot, the lentils from Paddy Walsh, everything that can make it substantial in there. It smells real. It smells like something. At noon, you serve the broth. Full, proper portions, as full as the ladle can manage, and the gruel on the side at 1 to 9. It's thin. You know it's thin. You're watching people's faces as they receive it. Most of them don't say anything. Most of them have been in this building long enough to know that you don't complain about the food. Complaining about the food leads to conversations with Fletcher. Conversations with Fletcher lead to being assigned to the stone-breaking yard, or to loss of the few small privileges that exist. So they eat what they're given. But the grey-eyed man, whose name you found out is William Garnett from Essex, here since last August, holds his bowl of gruel and he looks at you over the counter, and in his look is a question he's not going to ask. Short week, you say, quietly. He looks at the bowl, he nods, he moves on. You're in the kitchen at 3 o'clock, trying to work out the Saturday rationing on a piece of paper you've borrowed from the ledger back, when Fletcher arrives. He comes into the kitchen with the look of a man who has just been told something he needed to know 20 minutes ago. He looks at Mrs. Beale, he looks at you, he looks at the storeroom. How short are we? He asks. Mrs. Beale tells him. The numbers precisely, the way she does everything. Fletcher processes this. His face does something complicated. The calculation of a man weighing the cost of an emergency purchase against the cost of the appearance of mismanagement, against the actual cost of not having food, against the various reporting obligations that a workhouse has toward the board. I'll send a boy to the supplier, he says. It's Friday afternoon, Mrs. Beale says. He can try, Fletcher says. He goes, he sends a boy. The boy comes back 2 hours later with a receipt and a promise of delivery first thing Saturday morning. Saturday morning delivery means the breakfast gruel is also 1 to 9. Nobody says this is a problem. Nobody officially notes it. Nobody at the board will ever know. On Sunday morning, the delivery arrives, and the ratio goes back to 1 to 7, and Mrs. Beale makes the gruel with the particular precision of someone restoring order, and the bowls go out full, and most people eat without visible response except for William Garnett, who looks at his bowl and then up at you, and gives you a small nod that means he noticed the difference. That's the whole thing. That's the whole crisis. 3 days of thin gruel, 1 short delivery emergency, a Friday afternoon that got complicated. Nobody died. Nobody starved. The system creaked and adjusted and creaked back. But 3 days. 3 days of 1 to 9. In those 3 days, you've watched William Garnett's hands start shaking again. You've watched the child with the cold sore eat her bread so fast on Saturday that she finished before Doris had finished distributing, and then she sat at the table and waited with the specific patience of someone who has learned. That patience is the only option when the bowl is empty. The system holds. It holds and holds and holds, right until it doesn't. You don't go home. That's the thing. You live here, or over the kitchen of here, which is functionally the same. There's no commute. There's no walk back through the evening streets. There's just the garret room and the straw mattress and the crack in the window. But there's a night in the 3rd week of March, the night after the delivery crisis has fully resolved, the night after the first proper meal in 4 days, when you can't sleep. The building is quieter than usual. The worst of the winter coughing has passed. Something about March, even cold March, eases the lungs. The wind through the window crack is still cold, but a different cold. Not the deep January cold that gets into everything, but a transitional cold, the cold of weather that is in the process of becoming something else. You lie on your back in the dark. You've been thinking about the ratio, 1 to 6, 1 to 7, 1 to 8, 1 to 9. You've been thinking about the fact that the regulation says 1 to 6 and the reality is 1 to 7 on a good week, and 1 to 9 on a bad week, and the inspector who came in February wrote satisfactory in his report. And you're thinking about the fact that you haven't told anyone this. There's nobody to tell. There's no system for telling. The system is the system. The people who could change it are Fletcher, who benefits from the current arrangement, and the board, which is very far from the kitchen, and the inspector who was here for 45 minutes and found everything satisfactory. And you're thinking about Martha, who sat at the window table for 8 months and ate her gruel slowly, and whose name you didn't know until Doris told you, and who is in the infirmary now. Very old, Dr. Carmichael said, very old. You lie in the dark and you think about all of this. And then you think, you are 17 years old. You've been here 8 months. You can stir gruel without scalding it and negotiate with bone merchants and identify a good marrow bone by weight and make Friday's broth stretch when it has to. That's what you know how to do. Maybe that's what you can do. Not fix the ratio, not change the board's calculations, not make the budget larger, or the deliveries more reliable, or the winter shorter, but make the best broth you can. Find Kathy's good bones when there are good bones to find. Use the emergency tin for lentils when the broth is running thin. Skim the skin off the children's gruel when Mrs. Beale's back is turned. Fill the bowl of a girl at the gate when there's broth left in the pot. The gap between what should be and what is. Enormous. Impossible. Beyond anything you can touch. The gap between the worst version of what this kitchen can produce and the best version, smaller, manageable, yours. You work in the gap. In April, the light changes. This sounds like a small thing and isn't. The London light in winter is so thoroughly grey and used and second-hand that you stop noticing it, the way you stop noticing the smell. And then one morning you come out into the yard at 9 o'clock and the light hits the side of the building at an angle that is different, sharper, more interested. The yellow of it actually yellow rather than the dirty beige of winter. And you realise that something has shifted. The cold loosens its grip over the course of 2 weeks. Not all at once. It lurches forward and back. A warm day followed by a cold week. But the trend is clear. The crack in the window no longer makes itself known every morning. Jimmy the pump boy is outside in his shirt sleeves by mid-April. The children start moving differently. This is the first thing you notice in the dining hall when spring arrives. In winter, The children eat and sit and don't do much else. The cold takes energy to resist, and there isn't enough energy to spare. In spring, there's a different quality to mealtimes, a kind of reanimation. The child with the cold sore, whose cold sore has, over the weeks of March, finally healed, sometimes talks to the child next to her at the table. Sometimes they both talk. Sometimes something approaches laughter. Laughter in the dining hall, this happens. You notice it because it's different. The grey-eyed William Garnett comes through the line in April with a different posture, straighter. The hands steadier, not just occasionally but consistently, the shaking of winter receding as the cold recedes. He still doesn't say much, but when he takes his bowl now, he sometimes makes eye contact. Brief, but there. The kitchen garden behind the laundry, the ragged patch of earth that benefits from the bone meal from your spent bones, has been turned over and planted. Turnips mainly, some onions, the dried thyme seeds that Mrs. Beale keeps in the storeroom because she knows that in June there'll be fresh herbs for the broth, which is not a luxury but a functional improvement, the herbs adding something to the flavour that makes the broth more convincing as food. June feels very far away, but it's coming. The spring also brings a change in the oat deliveries, regular again since March, and in April, for the first time since January, the delivery actually includes something extra, a small quantity of molasses donated by a Quaker Philanthropic Society in Bishopsgate that makes occasional contributions to the local workhouses. Molasses, dark, thick, slightly bitter, intensely sweet. A substance so removed from the usual kitchen palate that when the delivery man brings it in, you stand looking at it for a moment, trying to work out what to do with it. Mrs. Beale looks at it. She looks at the gruel pot. She adds 2 tablespoons. The smell in the kitchen changes, just slightly, from the thin, flat smell of oats and water to something that has, underneath it, a dark sweetness, something that communicates warmth in a way that's separate from temperature. At breakfast service that morning, the first bowl goes to the grey-eyed William. He takes it. He looks at it. He takes a spoonful. He looks up. It's the closest thing to surprise you've seen on his face in 8 months. He doesn't say anything. He moves on. But 3/4 of the way through the service, you glance down the dining hall, and William Garnett is eating his gruel slowly, the way Martha used to eat. You stay. This is the thing you didn't know you'd decided until you realise you've decided it. A position at a private kitchen opens up in May. Not a grand kitchen, but a decent house in Hackney, a family kitchen, proper cooking rather than institutional feeding, better wages by maybe £1 a week. You hear about it through Kathy, who hears about it through one of her suppliers. You think about it for 3 days. You think about Lincolnshire and the farm and the letter of introduction that brought you here, and the decent boots that have since deteriorated. You think about what it would be like to cook food that people choose to eat. Food that has been designed to be enjoyed rather than to be enough. And then you think about 1 to 7. About what happens to 1 to 7 when the delivery is short. About the grey-eyed William and the child with the cold sore and the girl at the gate. About Mrs. Beale, who's been here 8 years, and who knows that the inspector's report will say satisfactory, regardless of what's in the pot, and who adds molasses to the gruel when there's molasses available, and who turns her back on the gate when there's a girl there with a cup. You tell Kathy you're not available. She looks at you. The workhouse, she says. You're staying at the workhouse. For now, you say. For now, she repeats. with the tone of someone who knows that for now sometimes means for a long time. She moves on to her next delivery. You go back to the kitchen. It's August when the year completes. August of 1862. 1 year since you arrived from Lincolnshire with a letter and boots that were then still decent. The city in August is a different thing from the city in January. The cold is gone, replaced by a heat that is specific to London. Not clean heat, not the heat of open fields, but heat overlaid with coal smoke and the exhalations of 2.5 million people and the particular temperature of a river that has been receiving the city's waste for longer than anyone wants to calculate. The smell is different too. In winter the cold suppresses it. In August, everything the city has been saving up is in the air at once. But the light is extraordinary. The August light in London late afternoon when the sun is at a specific angle and the coal smoke catches it and filters it. This light is almost amber. It hits the buildings along the lane outside the workhouse yard and makes them warm-looking in a way they haven't been all year. Makes the brick look like it has a memory of warmth rather than just reflecting borrowed heat. You're standing in the yard with this light on your face when Mrs. Beale comes out. She almost never comes outside during the day. The kitchen is where she is. The kitchen is what she does. She stands beside you for a moment. Then she says, "You've improved." You look at her. "The broth," she says. "Since the lentils, the marrow-bone arrangement with Cathy, it's better, nutritionally better." She doesn't say she's been talking to Dr. Carmichael, but you understand that she has. The children in the infirmary in February. One was a recurring case. The other hasn't been back. The other hasn't been back. That could mean many things. The girl might have left the workhouse, might have recovered, for other reasons, might have become a case in a different ward, but it might mean the broth. It might mean the lentils and the marrow bones and the emergency tin and the careful decision made in March about where to spend what was available. "I wanted to try the dried peas in the gruel," you say. "In the morning, for protein." She looks at you. "The texture," she says. "I know, but if they're soaked the night before and then cooked long enough." She's quiet for a moment. "Try it Saturday," she says. "Small batch." Saturday you try it. A quarter of the morning gruel, with the dried peas added, soaked overnight, soft, added in the last 20 minutes of cooking so they're thoroughly done, contributing their substance to the mixture without making the texture too wrong. At breakfast, you watch. The inmates who get the pea gruel portion from the left side of the pot eat at the same pace as everyone else. No complaints, no visible difference in expression. After service, Mrs. Beale asks, "Well?" "Nothing negative," you say. "Then we try it again." The following Wednesday, half the pot. The Wednesday after, all of it. 3/4 of a pint of gruel now containing oats and dried peas. Cook together, a slightly thicker texture, a slightly earthier flavour, a slightly more substantial thing. The ratio is still 1:7. But what's in it is better. It's not the turtle soup. It's not even close to the turtle soup. It's not close to anything approaching what the people in this building would choose to eat if they had the option to choose. But it's better. That's what you have. Better. It's a Thursday evening in late September when you understand something. You're on the roof of the counting house. The September evening light is different from the August amber. Cooler, more blue at the edges, the summer reluctantly beginning to fold itself away. London below you. Same city. Same smoke. Same river that you can locate by the density of activity along its banks, even if you can't see the water itself. But something about the angle this evening. Something about where you are now versus where you were a year ago makes it look different. You came here from Lincolnshire knowing almost nothing. You knew how to work. You knew how to read, which, as Mrs. Beale once said, looking directly at you, was more than she'd expected. You knew how to be somewhere and do what was needed. You didn't know anything about bone broth, about the economy of spent bones, about the specific ratio of water to oats that constitutes breakfast for the poor, about what molasses smells like when it hits a hot pot, about the way a child holds a tin bowl when she's trying not to spill it. You know all of it now. You're going to know more. You haven't learned everything. You haven't learned nearly everything. There's more about the suppliers and the seasonal variations in provision costs and the particular dynamics of the board meetings that determine the budget and the various philanthropic societies that occasionally donate molasses or blankets or cloth. There's more about the kitchen itself. Things Mrs. Beale knows that she hasn't taught you yet. The accumulated 8 years of knowledge that she dispenses in small quantities when she decides you're ready for them. There's more. There will always be more. But you know things now. Enough to make a difference. Enough to make the broth better. Enough to find the girl at the gate and fill the bowl when there's broth in the pot. Enough. The light is going now. The amber fading to blue to the first grey of evening, and down in the streets the lamplighters are starting their rounds, the small orange circles of gaslight appearing one by one along the main thoroughfares, though not this street, not the workhouse lane, not anywhere close to where you are. You climb down from the roof. You go back to the kitchen. Tomorrow's bread needs to be checked. The Friday delivery needs to be confirmed. The lentil supply is running low, and Paddy Walsh needs to know by Saturday. The work is always the work, and the work keeps 340 people fed. That's not small, even if the food is thin. Even if the ratio is 1:7 and the inspection report says satisfactory. Even if the great machine of the city grinds on regardless, the turtle soup and the gruel existing in the same city at the same time without ever quite acknowledging each other. It's not nothing. It's what you have. You go back to work. The garret room is cold tonight. Not January cold, September cold. The cold of autumn coming in. The cold of a season ending. Specific, honest, the kind of cold that doesn't pretend. The straw mattress crackles when you lie down. The crack in the window lets in a thin line of air that touches your face like a question. Outside, London continues. It always continues. The taverns in the side streets, the gin shops that never close, the costermongers packing up their barrows for the morning, the watchman calling the hour somewhere 2 streets over, his voice carrying in the September air. 2.5 million people settling into the night. 340 of them in this building, around you, above you and below you and across the yard. William Garnett in the men's ward, sleeping, you hope. The hands not shaken at this hour, the hands at rest. The child with a healed cold sore in the children's ward, wherever she is in the long row of small beds. Sleeping, certainly. Children sleep at 9 o'clock, when they've been up since 5:30, and worked and eaten 2 small meals and 1 smaller one. The new woman at Martha's window table, you've learnt her name is Eleanor, 28, here since July from Suffolk originally, in the women's ward. Whether she sleeps well or badly you don't know. Most people here sleep badly at first. Eventually the exhaustion wins. You close your eyes. Tomorrow is Friday. The oat delivery comes Friday. You'll check it when it arrives. You check everything now. because 8 months ago you didn't check it, and one time in 4, it's short in some way. And if you don't catch the shortfall at the door, you can't correct for it until it's already in the pot. Mrs. Beale hasn't told you to check it. You just started doing it because it needed doing. Tomorrow is also Kathy's day. She comes Fridays with whatever the butchers have. The marrow bones, if the butchers have marrow bones. The offcuts that nobody else will take. Whatever there is. You'll buy what's good. At 2/3 of her asking price if possible, closer to half if the quality is lower. You've gotten better at this negotiation over the year. Not aggressive, nothing like that, but clear. Knowing what the broth needs. Knowing what it costs to get there. The broth on Friday, if the bones are good, will be the best of the week. The people who eat it at noon on Friday will have the best midday meal of the week. This matters in a way that is small and completely invisible to anyone who isn't watching. It matters. The sounds of the building at night, breathing, the soft collective breathing of a building full of sleeping people. You can feel it more than hear it. A kind of rhythm in the walls, a biological pulse, 340 lungs expanding and contracting in the dark, coughing, not the winter coughing, but something milder, the residual clearing of throats. Someone in the ward below shifting on their bed, the iron frame creaking, a mouse somewhere in the kitchen, you think. You'll deal with that tomorrow. The watchman again, 9:30 and all's well, his voice reaching you through walls and floors in the September night. All's well, a ritual claim made on behalf of everyone who is asleep and can't verify it. You've been thinking lately about where this goes. Not this kitchen. This kitchen is a fixed thing. A thing that exists to perform a function, and it will keep performing it whether you're in it or someone else is. But you, in it. What you're learning, what you're becoming. You can make broth. You know bone quality by touch. You know the suppliers and their prices and the seasonal variations in what's available and the specific dynamics of a kitchen that feeds people who have nothing. This is knowledge. It's not the knowledge of a private cook in a fine house, not the knowledge that gets you into the great kitchens of London, not the knowledge that anyone talks about when they talk about cooking. It's the knowledge of keeping people alive, of making the thin thing as nourishing as it can be made, of filling the gap between what's given and what's needed with whatever is available. This knowledge is useful, more useful, in the arithmetic of people who need food than knowing how to make a sauce. You're not sure what that means for the future. You can't see that far. The future is as dark as the garret room, as unknowable as the streets outside at midnight, full of shapes that might be important and might be nothing at all. But you're here now. You know things now. You go into work tomorrow and you feed 340 people, and some of them will barely notice the food, and some of them will notice the warmth, and some of them will eat slowly in the way of people who understand that warmth, once present, should be made to last, and you'll know you made it as good as it could be made. That's the thing you carry. That's the thing that holds. The room darkens, or it doesn't. It's already dark, has been dark, but your awareness of it changes. The ceiling becomes something you're no longer looking at. The crack in the window becomes something you're no longer listening to. The city below becomes something you're no longer calculating. The sounds of London at night, the watchman's voice, the creak of the building, the distant tavern noise, the quiet breathing of hundreds of people sleeping. All of it softens, not disappearing, just becoming something you're further from. Something happening in a room you've stepped back from. The door still open, the sound still real, just less immediate. You think of Lincolnshire, the light there coming off flat fields, the smell of it, not coal smoke, not grease, not bones, just soil and grass and the North Sea wind. Your mother's kitchen, which was a different kind of kitchen entirely. That world is still real, it's still there. But you're here now. Both things can be true. Centuries will pass. The city you know, this Whitechapel of 1862, with its bone carts and its gruel pots, and its 340 sleeping people, will change until it's unrecognisable. The workhouse will be torn down. The building will become something else, and then something else again. The streets will be lit and paved and filled with things you couldn't imagine in 1862. The bone boilers will go. The spent bone economy will go. The gruel, that specific grey mixture of oats and too much water, will become a Victorian punchline, a symbol of the cruelty of the era, something people read about in history books with the comfortable distance of the already fed. But people will still be hungry. Different cities, different bones, different ratios, different names for the shortfall between what people need and what they have. Some things don't change. The human body doesn't change. It needs what it needs. And the people who feed it, the ones in the kitchens, the ones making the best version of the thin thing, the ones finding the margin between enough and not enough and holding it there, those people exist in every era. You are one of them. Now here in 1862, and whoever you are, wherever you are listening to this tonight, in a world with better food and longer lives and a different set of impossible problems, you are also one of them. The thing that holds, the warmth at the end of the cold. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Thomas Marsh in his garret room above the workhouse kitchen in Whitechapel. 1 year into the work of feeding people, 1 year into becoming the person who could do it. Let the sounds of the city fade. Let the calculations quiet. The ratios, the deliveries, the budget, the pots. Let your hands rest. They've done enough today. They've done enough. You're warm enough, safe enough, fed enough. You have work tomorrow that matters, and people who will notice if you don't show up, and things you know how to do that not everyone knows how to do. That's more than a lot of people have. That's enough. Sleep is already here. It's been here, patient, waiting for you to stop thinking long enough to let it in. Let it in now. The garret room, the straw mattress, the crack in the window, the city outside, breathing. 340 people around you, breathing. And you, sinking down, down into the quiet, down into the dark, down into the rest that your body has been asking for since 4 o'clock this morning. The watchman's voice, very far now. All's well, all's well. Good night.